In the City of Ember by Jeanne DuPrau, an underground city completely dependent on a single generator is starting to lose power, and only 2 children have uncovered the secret that could save them. But will they be able to do it before the city grows completely dark? I really enjoyed rereading The City of Ember last week, and I might have enjoyed it more this time around than I did the first time. Based on those vibes, I give it a rating of 3.75. But how will it fare after I run it through the 5P system that I use for my reviews? In this video, I go beyond vibes and look at the City of Ember using the 5P system of purpose, plot, etc., prose, personal, and position. Then I will give it a final rating based on the average of its individual ratings. As always, thanks to BookGabber of BookTok for originating the 5P methodology. Let's start with purpose. In children's novels, the purpose is usually what we would call the moral of the story. And that makes me want to push back a little because the City of Ember is so much more than just an aid in children's moral formation. It seems to understand that children can also be sophisticated readers who want something more out of what they're reading than just a lecture. And Jeanne DuPrau really does seem to assume that her readers are already intelligent, empathetic, and sensitive. And that is shown even in the presentation of the moral lesson. And that lesson is that we have to stick together. We have to think about the good of others as well as our own individual good, not because it's good for the collective, which will end up being good for us, but because it is also in and of itself good for us. I hope I got that paradox across. It's quite a nice lesson. And it might be a social moral, but DuPrau gives it an interior aspect, which I appreciate very much. Ultimately, the story is not a mere vehicle for the lesson, but the lesson is one of many strong threads that come together really well and make the City of Ember a whole that is greater than just the sum of its parts. And that is why for purpose, I give this a 4 out of 5. Now let's look at plot, etc., the literary elements. Setting, character, and of course plot. And sometimes I look at others, but those are the big 3. Interestingly, the saving of Ember from inevitable destruction is not the main plot. It's just the backdrop to 2 coming-of-age stories. Those are the stories of Lina Mayfleet and Dune Harrow, our 2 12-year-old protagonists. One thing I admire about the plotting is that although Lina and Dune's stories are pretty asymmetrical, DuPrau is able to weave them together in a really convincing way. But while they share the same ending, the integrity of their individual arcs is preserved. Lina fulfills her story, Dune fulfills his. The main thing I did not like about the plotting was that there was one thing that came really, really easily to them. What were the odds that the secret box of instructions would be found in Lina's apartment where it had been the entire time? It just seems a little too easy. DuPrau does throw in another complication so that the characters still have to deal with that for a few more chapters. But I really would have liked them to have found the secret box in a different way. The only good thing I can say about this is that it adds a sense of enchantment to the story, and a sense of enchantment is always good in children's literature. But it's really the characters who make this novel what it is. Lina is especially lovely as a character. She has a really big heart. We see her get tempted in the middle of the story. She kind of gets pulled to the dark side a little, but She comes back to the light because of the love that she has for her family and because of her innate sense of fairness. Dune is also really interesting. He has his own struggle against what we might call his fatal flaw. And okay, this is the interesting part, and I'm being really vague. He does not quite overcome it. At least he does not overcome it in time for him to be the hero that he wants to be. He learns his lesson, but he learns it looking back and realizing, oh, I should have done something differently. And when we look at the stakes of this story, that's a pretty heavy way to learn your lesson. Finally, the setting, I really liked it. The subterranean setting was really convincing to me. I got a good sense of all the places in Ember, from Linus and Dune's apartments to the sprawling pipeworks underneath the city. This is not because DuPrau is detailed in her descriptions, but because she is evocative with the few words that she does choose. Middle grade novels do have a word limit, but she does a lot with the few words she's given. And I think that's a great segue into prose, but before I go there, I will give the rating for this. For plot, etc., I give The City of Ember a 4. Now I'll say a little more about prose. If I had to describe the writing in 3 words, they would be neat, sensitive, and colorful. And colorful might seem an odd word to choose because Ember is, at this late stage in its history, really drab. But it's colorful in its drabness. We see that some things are really worn and shabby, but there are still some bright spots of color, like Linus' red messenger jacket or Dune's yellow slicker that he has to wear in the pipeworks. I just get the sense from the way DuPrau writes that she really loves her little fictional city, and that's why she has given it a defiantly brighter palette than even, I guess, the citizens of Ember would expect. And I call the writing sensitive because it does not just tell us how things appear, but also how they feel. The emotional lives of the characters is very much at play, even if it's not in the foreground. And when I say the style is neat, what I mean is that it's not especially beautiful prose, but it gives me the sense of being in a room packed with a lot of stuff, but in which the stuff is arranged really well so that we can appreciate everything. So it's cluttered but clean. And for these reasons, I give a prose score of 4. Now for my personal rating. I am a big enjoyer of middle grade novels and of fantasy world building, and The City of Ember delivered on those counts. Sure, there were some predictable plot points, but they're easily chalked up to the protagonists being all of 12 years old. I have listened to other reviews in which the reviewers pointed out that it would be a little more believable if we aged Lina and Dune up a little. And while I agree with them, it would have, in the end, been a very different story. So we have to let The City of Ember be what it is. I would also recommend The City of Ember to any young reader. Of course, those who really like action adventure reading will get a lot out of this and find it fun. But even readers who prefer more emotional books about relationships and inner growth could, I think, appreciate this. Lina's character arc provides that in spades, and she really is a good emotional heart to this novel, holding everything together. For personal, my rating is a 4. Finally, position. This is where I look at the place a novel has in the canon and the impact it has had on culture in general. The City of Ember is usually described as dystopian fiction, though it's not. Ember is a pretty well-functioning society that happens to have a mix of good people and bad people. Our world full of screens is a lot more dystopian than Ember is. We also can't really call it science fiction because technology does not play a really big role, or if it does, it's totally in the background. I guess the closest classification is post-apocalyptic fiction, but even then, it misses the mark because although the citizens of Ember are living in a giant underground bunker, they have forgotten their own history. So it carries no weight in the story. But whatever the genre, the City of Ember does not really seem to be part of a greater conversation in dystopia, in post-apocalyptic fiction, or even in children's literature in general. Its impact seems limited to the entertainment of its young readers, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Wholesome entertainment is good. There was a movie that was made several years later, but its impact was also pretty limited. As much as I genuinely like this book, I have to admit that it seems to be a secret diamond that young readers will have to discover on their own because it might not be recommended to them. And then they'll read it and love it and maybe promptly forget about it again so that the readers who come after them will also discover it on their own. A secret diamond. And that's why for position, I give it a rating of 2. And if we add up all those scores and get the average, the final rating is a 3.6, which is pretty close to the Vibes rating. So what do you think? Have you also read The City of Ember? And if so, would you have rated it differently on any of the 5 points? Or even rated it differently based on vibes? Please feel free to leave a comment. As I said, I enjoyed this reading experience, and if I could extend it by discussing The City of Ember with more readers, I would really love that.